Rain hammered against the living room window like an angry drunk demanding entry. I was hunched over my vintage stereo system, trying to coax life back into the ancient amplifier that June had been nagging me to replace for months, when I heard her voice drift down from upstairs. "I'm going to the Neon Silo tonight with Rhett," she said into her phone, her tone sharp and deliberate. "If you don't like it, we can just break up." I froze, screwdriver halfway to a loose connection. Did I just get dumped by ultimatum over a conversation about drum and bass music? The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, trying to fix something that clearly couldn't be repaired, while upstairs, my wife was busy breaking something that apparently never worked in the first place. My name is Kian Merrin, and I've spent the last 8 years as an IT specialist for Riverside City's municipal government. It's not glamorous work, mostly fixing printers that jam every time someone looks at them sideways and explaining to middle-aged bureaucrats why they can't download 17 different weather apps on their work computers. But it pays the bills, keeps food on the table, and gave me the skills I'd soon discover were more valuable than I'd ever imagined. June Calren, she kept her maiden name, which should have been my first red flag, worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized consulting firm downtown. She made decent money, certainly more than me, and never let me forget it. Our house in the Riverside Heights neighborhood was a testament to her ambitions, a 2-story colonial with peeling paint and creaky hardwood floors that she constantly complained about but refused to help fix. The voice on the other end of her phone call was muffled, but I could make out the general tone of agreement. June laughed. Not the warm, genuine laugh I remembered from our early dating days, but something calculated and performative. "Perfect," she continued. "I'll wear that black dress. You know, the one that makes me look like trouble." I set down my screwdriver and listened more intently. The floorboards above my head creaked as she moved around the bedroom, probably pulling clothes from the closet that had somehow become exclusively hers over the years. "Kian won't care," she said, and I could practically hear the dismissive wave of her hand. "He's too busy playing with his broken electronics to notice what I do anymore." Well, that stung. Not because it was entirely untrue. I did spend a lot of evenings tinkering with vintage audio equipment. But because of how casually she dismissed our entire relationship to whoever was on the other end of that call, I crept to the bottom of the stairs, careful to avoid the third step that squeaked like a wounded mouse. June's voice became clearer. "I miss how things used to be, Rhett. Remember when we'd go out every weekend? Before I settled for this?" Rhett Vossin. Of course. June's ex-boyfriend from college. The guy who owned a used car dealership on the south side of town and drove around in a cherry red Camaro like he was still 22 instead of pushing 35. I'd met him exactly twice at social gatherings, and both times he'd managed to work his supposed success into every conversation within the first 5 minutes. "Tonight will be just like old times," June continued. "And if Kian has a problem with it, well, maybe it's time we both moved on to better things." I stood there in my own hallway, listening to my wife plan what sounded suspiciously like the end of our marriage, and felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak. That would come later, probably. Right now, what I felt was something much more dangerous. Clarity. June had always been beautiful in an obvious way. Blonde hair that came from an expensive salon, perfectly applied makeup, clothes that cost more than my monthly car payment. But somewhere along the line, that beauty had become a weapon she wielded to get what she wanted, and apparently what she wanted now wasn't me. I heard her footsteps moving toward the bathroom, followed by the sound of running water. She was getting ready for her big night out with Rhett, probably planning to come home late with some story about girls' night or a work event. The lies came so easily to her now that I wondered how many I'd already missed. Instead of confronting her, the old Kian would have stomped upstairs and demanded an explanation. I walked calmly to my computer and opened a new browser window. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the same methodical precision I used to troubleshoot network problems at work. First, I looked up the Neon Silo nightclub. It had a reputation as the kind of place where married people went to pretend they weren't married, where the drinks were overpriced and the music was loud enough to drown out guilty consciences. Perfect for June's purposes. Then I did something that would have seemed impossible for the man I'd been that morning. I started planning. June came downstairs 20 minutes later, transformed. The black dress she'd mentioned clung to her like liquid shadow, and she'd piled her hair up in a way that showed off the diamond earrings I'd bought her for our last anniversary. She looked stunning, and she knew it. "I'm going out," she announced, not quite meeting my eyes as she grabbed her purse from the kitchen counter. "I heard," I said, not looking up from my computer screen. She paused, probably expecting more of a reaction. When I didn't provide one, she added, "I might be late. Don't wait up." Wouldn't dream of it. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Something in my tone must have caught her attention because she turned to study my face. I kept my expression neutral, even managing a small smile. "Are you okay with this?" she asked, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the woman I'd married, uncertain, maybe even a little guilty. "Why wouldn't I be?" I replied. "You're a grown woman. You can make your own choices." The uncertainty vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like disappointment. Maybe she'd wanted a fight. Maybe drama would have made whatever she was planning easier to justify. "Right," she said finally. "Well, I'll see you tomorrow." "Have fun," I called as she headed for the door. "Tell Rhett I said hello." She froze with her hand on the doorknob, and I savored the moment of panic that flashed across her face. "How did you—" "The walls are thin, June, and you're not as quiet as you think." For a heartbeat, I thought she might come clean, might sit down and explain whatever was happening between us like an adult. Instead, she lifted her chin in that defiant way that used to be charming and was now just irritating. "Fine. Yes, I'm meeting Rhett. We're old friends, and I'm allowed to have friends." "Of course you are," I agreed, just like I'm allowed to have opinions about those friendships. She waited for me to elaborate, but I'd said everything I intended to say. After a moment, she shook her head and walked out, leaving me alone with the sound of rain and the smell of her expensive perfume. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway before I moved. Then I went upstairs to our bedroom and began the most therapeutic packing session of my life. June's side of the closet was a monument to her vanity. Designer clothes arranged by color and season, shoes that cost more than some people's rent, handbags for every conceivable occasion. I pulled out her 3 most expensive suitcases and began filling them with everything that screamed, "Look at how successful I am." The black cocktail dress she'd rejected in favor of tonight's outfit. The Louboutin heels she'd bought to celebrate her last promotion. The jewelry box full of gifts from birthdays and anniversaries past. Her collection of designer handbags. Even the silk scarves she never wore but insisted on keeping because they were investment pieces. It took me 45 minutes to pack up what felt like half our bedroom. When I was finished, I loaded everything into my pickup truck and drove toward downtown, windshield wipers fighting the rain that seemed determined to wash the whole city clean. The neon silo sat on a corner lot like a neon-wrapped mistake, all flashing lights and bass-heavy music that you could feel in your chest from 2 blocks away. The parking lot was full of cars that cost more than I made in a year, and the line to get in stretched around the building despite the weather. I found June's silver BMW parked near the front. She'd always been good at talking her way into prime spots, and pulled up beside it. Through the club's windows, I could see silhouettes moving against colored lights, and I wondered which one was my wife. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "Having a great time. Don't wait up." I typed back, "No problem. Come outside for a second. I brought you something." The response came quickly. "What? Why are you here?" "Just come out. Trust me." 5 minutes later, June emerged from the club looking flustered and annoyed, her perfect hair slightly mussed from the humidity inside. Rhett followed a step behind her, and I got my first good look at the man who'd apparently been occupying my wife's thoughts. He was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, artificially tanned, wearing a shirt that was probably worth more than my monthly grocery budget. The kind of man who used cologne like a weapon and thought confidence could be purchased at a dealership. "Kian, what the hell are you doing here?" June demanded, raising her voice to be heard over the music spilling from the club's entrance. Instead of answering, I got out of my truck and walked to the back, where I began unloading her suitcases onto the wet pavement. June's face went from annoyed to confused to something approaching panic as she recognized her belongings. "What is this?" she asked, but her voice had lost its edge. "Everything you need for your new life," I said calmly, setting the last suitcase down with deliberate care. "You said if I didn't like your plans, we could break up. Well, I don't like them." A small crowd had gathered to watch the show, other clubgoers drawn by the drama unfolding in the parking lot. Someone had their phone out, probably recording everything for social media. Perfect. "You can't be serious," June said, but she was already looking at the suitcases like they were evidence of some crime she'd committed. "I'm absolutely serious," I replied. "You want to relive your glory days with Rhett? Go ahead. But you don't get to keep me as your backup plan while you figure out what makes you happy." Rhett stepped forward, puffing out his chest in what I assumed was supposed to be an intimidating manner. "Look, buddy, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted. June made her choice pretty clear. I'm just making mine. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app, taking a quick photo of the 3 suitcases sitting in the rain. Then I opened my contacts and found the number for the Neon Silos Management. Publicly available information thanks to their business license. Hi, I said when someone answered. I'd like to report that there's someone using a fake ID at your club tonight. Blonde woman, black dress, goes by June Calren, but that's not her real name. It wasn't technically true, but it wasn't technically false either. June had been married to me for 8 years, and her driver's license still showed her maiden name while her credit cards showed her married name. The kind of discrepancy that paranoid bouncers love to investigate. I hung up and smiled at June's horrified expression. You didn't, she whispered. I did, and I suggest you figure out your transportation situation quickly, because I'm betting security is going to want to have a conversation with you in about 30 seconds. Right on cue, 2 large men in black shirts emerged from the club, scanning the parking lot with the focused intensity of people who took their jobs very seriously. June grabbed frantically for the nearest suitcase, but it was too heavy to carry easily in her heels. Rhett tried to help, but between the rain and his obvious inexperience with actual work, they made a comical picture. 2 people who'd spent their evening pretending to be something they weren't, now struggling with the weight of reality. I got back in my truck and rolled down the window. Oh, and June, I called. You might want to check your credit cards. I canceled the joint account about an hour ago. Have a wonderful evening. I drove away to the sound of her voice calling my name, but I didn't look back. In my rearview mirror, I could see her standing in the rain next to 3 expensive suitcases, finally understanding that actions have consequences. The old Kian would have felt guilty. The old Kian would have turned around and apologized and helped her load everything back into his truck. But the old Kian had just gotten dumped by ultimatum in his own living room, and he wasn't coming back. I slept better that night than I had in months, which probably says something disturbing about the state of my marriage. When I woke up the next morning to an empty house and 17 missed calls from June, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete control over my own life. The voicemails were a fascinating study in the 5 stages of grief, compressed into digital format. Anger. How dare you embarrass me like that? Bargaining. If you come get me right now, we can pretend this never happened. Depression. I can't believe you'd throw away 8 years over one night out. And finally, acceptance. Fine. If this is how you want to play it, I can play too. That last message had been left at 3 a.m, and June's voice carried the kind of cold fury that would have terrified me 24 hours earlier. Now it just sounded like someone who'd finally shown their true colors. I made coffee in the blissfully quiet kitchen and considered my options. June would retaliate. That much was certain. She'd probably try to turn our mutual friends against me, maybe spread some story about how I'd had a psychotic break or started drinking heavily. The old playbook of someone caught doing something indefensible. But I had advantages she didn't know about. 8 years of marriage had taught me things about June that she'd forgotten I knew. Her passwords, she used variations of the same 3 combinations for everything. Her schedule, predictable as clockwork, down to which coffee shop she visited on which days. Her weaknesses, and she had more of those than she realized. My phone rang as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. The caller ID showed Rhett's used car dealership. Kian? His voice was cautious, like he was trying to defuse a bomb over the phone. Look, man, I think we need to talk. Do we? I asked, settling back in my chair. I thought last night was pretty clear communication. June is really upset. She spent the night at my place on the couch, he added quickly, as if that detail mattered. She's talking about lawyers and divorce and all kinds of crazy stuff. Doesn't sound crazy to me. Sounds like the natural consequence of her choices. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him trying to figure out how to handle someone who wasn't playing by the expected rules. The thing is, he continued, I think there's been a misunderstanding. June and I were just friends, always have been. Last night was just 2 old friends catching up. At a nightclub, at midnight, after she told you she was ready to leave her husband. Another pause, longer this time. You were listening to her phone calls? I was listening to my wife talk in my house, I corrected, and what I heard was someone planning to cheat on me with a guy who sells used cars and still thinks a red Camaro makes him look successful instead of desperate. Now hold on. No, you hold on, I interrupted, and for the first time in years, I let my voice carry some real edge. You want to play games with married women? Fine, but don't call me pretending you're some innocent bystander who got caught up in someone else's drama. You knew exactly what you were doing. I hung up before he could respond and immediately opened my laptop. Time to do some research. Rhett Vossin owned Vossin Motors, a small used car lot that specialized in what their website called pre-owned luxury vehicles. A quick search of public records showed that the business had been struggling. 3 liens filed in the past year, several unpaid vendor bills, and a pattern of customer complaints about cars that looked better than they ran. More interesting was Rhett's personal situation. 2 previous bankruptcies, both blamed on economic downturns and unfair competition. A series of addresses that suggested he moved frequently, probably staying one step ahead of creditors. And most useful of all, a collection of unpaid parking tickets that had apparently been ignored for months. I spent the morning making phone calls, not to lawyers or private investigators, I couldn't afford either, but to city departments that most people forgot existed. The Parking Violations Bureau was happy to flag Rhett's Camaro for immediate booting the next time it was spotted in a violation. The Business Licensing Department was very interested to learn that Vossin Motors might be operating without proper insurance coverage. The Health Department found it concerning that a food truck operating near Rhett's lot might be violating proximity regulations. None of it was illegal. All of it was perfectly legitimate use of public resources to investigate potential violations. And all of it would make Rhett's life significantly more complicated over the next few days. By lunchtime, I was ready for Phase 2 of what I was starting to think of as Operation Reality Check. June worked downtown in a glass office building that was trying very hard to look more important than it actually was. I knew her schedule better than she did. Lunch at 12:30 every day, always at one of 3 restaurants within walking distance, always back by 1:15 because she was paranoid about being late. I parked across the street from her building and waited. Sure enough, at exactly 12:28, she emerged wearing a different outfit than I'd ever seen before, probably borrowed from whoever had taken her in the night before. She looked tired and stressed, which wasn't surprising given that she'd spent the night sleeping on someone's couch. She walked 2 blocks to her usual sandwich shop, and I followed at a distance. This wasn't stalking. This was intelligence gathering. There's a difference, even if the courts might not see it that way. June ordered her usual turkey and avocado on wheat bread, no mayo, extra lettuce. She paid with her personal credit card, which meant she hadn't figured out yet that I'd only canceled our joint accounts. That oversight would work in my favor. I waited until she was walking back to her office before I made my move. Instead of confronting her directly, that would have been too easy, too expected, I walked into the sandwich shop and struck up a conversation with the cashier. "Excuse me?" I said, pulling out my phone to show a photo of June from our last anniversary dinner. "The woman who was just in here, did she seem okay to you? I'm her husband, and she's been acting really strange lately. I'm worried she might be having some kind of breakdown." The cashier, a college-aged kid with kind eyes and too much empathy for his own good, immediately looked concerned. "She did seem upset," he admitted, "like she'd been crying or something. Is she okay?" "I don't know," I said, letting genuine worry creep into my voice. "She disappeared last night, and when she finally called, she was talking about leaving me for her ex-boyfriend. It's not like her at all. I'm wondering if she's been drinking more lately or maybe taking something she shouldn't be." It wasn't technically lying. June had disappeared, she was talking about leaving me, and it really wasn't like the woman I'd married. The implications I was letting him draw were his own business. "That's terrible," the kid said. "I hope she gets help." "Me too. If you see her again and she seems off, maybe you could give me a call. I just want to make sure she's safe." I left my number and walked out, knowing that the story would spread. Sandwich shop employees talked to each other, and they talked to regular customers. By the end of the week, half of downtown would have heard some version of the story about the woman who was having a breakdown and abandoning her worried husband. The beauty of it was that it was all true, just framed in a way that made me look like the victim instead of the villain. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Orion, June's friend. We need to talk." Orion Vanton. I'd met her a few times at June's work events. A sharp-dressed woman who worked in tech and always seemed to be watching everyone else like she was gathering data for some future use. June had described her as her best friend, but I'd always gotten the impression that Orion was the kind of person who collected friends the way other people collected business cards. I texted back, "About what?" "About the mess you made last night. Meet me at Riverside Diner on 5th Street. 1 hour." Interesting. June's best friend wanted to negotiate. That suggested June was more rattled by the previous night than she'd let on in her voicemails. I arrived at the diner early and chose a booth near the back where we could talk without being overheard. Orion showed up exactly on time, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I made in a month and an expression that could have frozen water. "Kian," she said, sliding into the booth across from me without offering to shake hands. "Orion, thanks for coming." She studied me for a moment, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "June says you've lost your mind," she said finally, "that you humiliated her in public and threw her out of her own house over nothing." "Is that what she told you?" That's what she told me. But I've known June for 5 years, and I know when she's not telling the whole story. I leaned back in my seat, curious about where this was going. What do you think the whole story is? Orion smiled, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. I think June got caught doing something she shouldn't have been doing, and you decided to stop being a pushover about it. The question is, what do you want? Want? From me. You agreed to meet me, which means you think I can give you something you need. So what is it? I had to admit, I was impressed. Orion was treating this like a business negotiation, which was probably exactly how she approached most of her relationships. Information, I said finally. About June? About June, about Rhett, about how long this has been going on and who else knows about it. Orion signaled the waitress for coffee and took her time stirring in cream before she answered. June and Rhett have been texting for about 3 months, she said finally. Started as Facebook messages about some mutual friend's wedding, turned into regular communication. She's been complaining about you for longer than that. How you don't appreciate her, how you've gotten boring, how she feels like she's settled. Each word hit like a small punch, but I kept my expression neutral. And you didn't think to mention this to me? Not my marriage, not my problem. Besides, I figured if you cared enough to pay attention, you'd figure it out on your own. Well, I figured it out. You certainly did. Very dramatic, by the way. June was furious, but I think she was also a little impressed. She's used to you backing down from confrontation. I'm full of surprises lately. Orion laughed, and this time it sounded genuine. I bet you are. So what's your plan now? Divorce lawyers and custody battles? We don't have kids. Asset division, then. Spousal support. The whole ugly process. I shook my head. I'm not interested in lawyers. Too expensive, too slow, too unpredictable. Then what? I met her eyes across the table. I'm interested in making sure June understands the full consequences of her choices, and I think you might be interested in helping me do that. Orion raised an eyebrow. Why would I want to help you hurt my friend? Because June isn't really your friend, I said quietly. She's your project. You like having someone around who makes you feel superior, who asks for your advice and then ignores it, who gives you drama to analyze from a safe distance, but you don't actually like her very much, do you? For the first time since she'd sat down, Orion looked genuinely surprised. That's a hell of an assumption. Is it wrong? She was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee in slow circles. What kind of help are you looking for? She asked finally. The kind that requires someone with access to June's social media accounts and her work email? That's illegal. Only if you're hacking into them. If someone gives you their passwords because they trust you, that's just poor judgment on their part. Orion smiled again, and this time it was definitely not pleasant. You're more interesting than June gave you credit for, she said. I'm just getting started. The next few days unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of minor disasters, each movement building on the last until the whole composition reached a crescendo of public humiliation that would have impressed Machiavelli. Rhett was the first to feel the pressure. His precious Camaro got booted outside the courthouse on Tuesday morning. Apparently he'd forgotten about those unpaid parking tickets. The photo of him arguing with the parking enforcement officer while dressed in his best successful businessman costume made it onto the Riverside City Facebook community page within hours, accompanied by dozens of comments from people who'd apparently been waiting years for Rhett Vossin to get his comeuppance. About time someone held this guy accountable, wrote one commenter. He sold my cousin a lemon and then refused to return her calls. I heard his dealership is about to go under, added another. Too bad. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. But the real masterpiece was what happened to June. Orion, it turned out, was even more ruthless than I'd imagined. She'd been collecting June's secrets for years. Not out of malice, exactly, but out of the same compulsive need to gather information that made her good at her tech job. She knew about June's habit of padding her expense reports with personal purchases. She knew about the time June had blamed a major project failure on a coworker who'd been out on maternity leave. She knew about the company credit card that June sometimes used for personal expenses, always intending to pay it back, but somehow never getting around to it. Most importantly, she knew June's passwords for everything. She uses the same 3 combinations for every account, Orion explained when we met for coffee on Wednesday morning. Her birthday plus her high school graduation year, her maiden name plus the number of her apartment from college, and the name of her first cat plus her wedding anniversary. Not exactly NSA-level security. And you're comfortable with this? I asked, because even in my current state of moral flexibility, I wanted to make sure we were both clear about what we were doing. I'm comfortable with teaching someone a lesson about treating people like disposable conveniences, Orion replied. June has been using you as her safety net while she figured out whether she could do better. Now she gets to find out what life looks like without a safety net. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Orion would use her legitimate access to June's social media accounts. June had given her the passwords months ago, so Orion could post updates when June was traveling for work to share some carefully curated information with June's online network. Nothing illegal. Nothing that wasn't true. Just a strategic release of information that June had foolishly assumed would stay private. The first post went live on Wednesday evening, shared from June's own Facebook account. Sometimes you have to be honest about who you really are. I've been lying to myself and everyone else for too long. Time to stop pretending I'm someone I'm not. Cryptic enough to generate curiosity, specific enough to make people wonder what June was talking about. The comments started immediately. Everything okay, hun? From June's coworker Lisa. What's going on? Call me. From her college roommate. Proud of you for being authentic. From someone who clearly had no idea what they were responding to. June, who was apparently staying at some extended stay hotel while she figured out her living situation, called me within an hour of the post going live. What did you do? She demanded without preamble. I'm having dinner, I replied calmly, which was true. I was eating leftover Chinese food and enjoying the most peaceful evening I'd had in months. What are you talking about? My Facebook post. I didn't write that. Then who did? You, obviously. June, I don't have your Facebook password. I don't even have my own Facebook password memorized. You know I'm not good with social media. It was a beautiful moment, watching someone realize that their paranoia was making them sound crazy, even when they were absolutely right about being sabotaged. Someone is messing with my accounts, she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Have you considered changing your passwords? I suggested helpfully. Maybe using something more secure than your birthday and graduation year? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. How did you? Lucky guess, you use the same password for everything, June. You always have. It's not exactly a state secret. She hung up, but the damage was done. Now she knew someone was targeting her specifically, but she couldn't prove it was me, and she couldn't stop it without admitting she'd been careless with her digital security. The second post went up Thursday morning. Learning some hard truths about friendship lately. Amazing how people you trust will smile to your face and then betray you the moment it's convenient. At least I know who my real friends are now. This one was more direct, and the response was immediate. June's social circle began dividing into camps. Those who assumed she was talking about me and offered sympathy, and those who wondered if she was talking about them and got defensive. If this is about someone specific, maybe you should talk to them directly instead of posting cryptic messages, commented her friend Sarah. Some of us are trying to be supportive, but it's hard when we don't know what's happening, added her coworker Mike. Drama much? Wrote someone I didn't recognize, but who clearly wasn't impressed with June's online behavior. The third post was the masterpiece. When you find out your best friend has been working against you all along, trust no one, I guess? Orion had outdone herself with that one. It was perfectly calculated to make everyone in June's social circle wonder if they were the friend being referenced, while simultaneously making June look paranoid and unstable. The comments on that post were absolute chaos. Okay, this is getting weird, wrote Lisa from work. Maybe take a break from social media for a while? Are you talking about me? Demanded someone named Tracy. Because if you have something to say it directly. This is really uncomfortable to watch, added Mike. Can someone who actually knows what's going on please explain? But the real genius was in the private messages that Orion showed me screenshots of later. June's friends were texting each other, trying to figure out what was happening and whether they should be worried or annoyed. June is acting really strange lately, Lisa had written to Sarah. Do you think she's okay? I heard she and Kian are getting divorced, Sarah replied. Maybe she's having a breakdown. She's been posting weird stuff all week. Very unlike her. Should we do something? Like an intervention? By Friday morning, June's carefully curated image as a successful, put-together professional was in ruins. Her social media presence, which she'd spent years crafting to project success and happiness, now made her look unstable and paranoid. But we weren't done yet. The coup de grace came Friday afternoon when June's boss received an anonymous email with documentation of her expense report irregularities and questionable use of company resources. Nothing that would get her arrested, but everything that would get her called into a very uncomfortable meeting with HR. I was having lunch at a cafe near June's office building when I saw her emerge looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup was smudged, and she was walking with the defeated posture of someone who just realized how far they'd fallen. She spotted me through the cafe window and marched inside with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You," she said, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "This is all you." "What's all me?" I asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Sit down, June. You look terrible. Don't pretend you don't know what you've done. My job, my friends, my social media. You've been sabotaging everything." "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out how to explain what had happened without sounding completely paranoid. "I know it was you," she said finally. "You know a lot of things that aren't true," I replied, "like how you knew Rhett was just a friend, like how you knew I wouldn't notice you planning to cheat on me, like how you knew you could give me an ultimatum and I'd just accept it. I wasn't—" "You weren't what? Planning to cheat? Planning to leave? Planning to keep me around as backup while you figured out if you could do better?" She sat down heavily, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said quietly. "How was it supposed to happen?" "I don't know. I felt trapped, like my life was happening to someone else and I was just watching it. Rhett made me remember what it felt like to be excited about something." "And I made you feel what? Bored? Disappointed? Settled?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her silence was confirmation enough. "Well," I said, standing up and leaving money on the table for my coffee. "Now you get to find out what excitement without security feels like. I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be." I walked out of the cafe and left her sitting there, probably for the first time in years, forced to confront the reality that actions have consequences and choices have costs. But I still wasn't finished. The best part was yet to come. Saturday morning brought the kind of gray, drizzly weather that made Riverside City look like a movie set for a film about urban decay. I was in my kitchen, actually enjoying the silence that had become the soundtrack of my new life, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rhett's number, which was interesting. I'd been wondering when he'd work up the courage to contact me directly instead of using June as an intermediary. "Kian," he said when I answered, and his voice carried the kind of forced casualness that meant he was about to try to manipulate me. "Look, this whole situation has gotten out of hand. I think we need to meet and work this out like adults." "Do we?" I asked, settling back in my chair with my coffee. "I thought we worked it out pretty clearly on Wednesday night." "That wasn't working anything out. That was you having some kind of public meltdown. June is really worried about you, man. We both are." The audacity was breathtaking. The man who'd been planning to sleep with my wife was now expressing concern for my mental health. "How thoughtful of you both," I said. "Where did you want to meet?" "There's an old warehouse down by the river near the abandoned textile plant. You know the one? It's private, quiet. We can talk without anyone bothering us." I had to admire his choice of location. The warehouse district was mostly empty these days, full of buildings that had been gutted by the economic downturn and left to rot. Perfect for a conversation that people might not want overheard. "What time?" I asked. "How about 8 tonight? That gives us all day to think about what we want to say." "All of us?" "June wants to be there too, and probably Orion. She's been helping June deal with all this stress you've been causing." Oh, this was going to be interesting. Rhett thought he was setting up some kind of intervention where the three of them would confront me about my unreasonable behavior and convince me to be the accommodating husband I'd always been. What he didn't know was that Orion had been feeding me information for days and that I'd been planning for exactly this kind of confrontation. "Sure," I said. 8 o'clock at the warehouse. I'll be there." "Great. And Kian, try to keep an open mind, okay? We're all on the same side here." I hung up and immediately called Orion. "They want to meet tonight," I told her. "All of us, at the old warehouse by the river." "I know," she said. "Rhett called me an hour ago. He thinks he's orchestrating some kind of group therapy session where you apologize for being mean and agree to let June come home." "And what do you think is going to happen?" "I think Rhett is about to learn that he's not as smart as he thinks he is. And I think June is about to discover that her problems are bigger than just an angry husband." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been busy this week. Remember how I mentioned that June has been careless with company resources? Her expense reports? Among other things. It turns out that when you have access to someone's email account, you can learn all sorts of interesting things about their professional conduct. And when you have friends in the right places, you can make sure that information reaches the right people." I felt a chill of something that might have been conscience. "Orion, what did you do?" "I made sure June's boss has a complete picture of her recent performance issues, the expense account irregularities, the project she sabotaged, the company credit card she's been using for personal expenses, All documented, all verifiable, all grounds for immediate termination. When? The meeting is Monday morning. June doesn't know yet. The pieces were falling into place, and I realized that Orion had been playing a much deeper game than I'd understood. She wasn't just helping me get revenge on June, she was systematically destroying June's entire life. Why? I asked. Because June is the kind of person who thinks consequences are for other people, Orion said simply. She spent years treating everyone around her like they exist for her convenience. You, me, her co-workers, even Rhett. It's time she learned what it feels like to be on the receiving end. And you're okay with that? I'm more than okay with it. I'm looking forward to it. I spent the rest of the day thinking about what was going to happen at the warehouse. Rhett probably expected me to show up angry and defensive, ready to be talked down from my irrational position. June probably expected to be able to manipulate me the way she always had, with tears and apologies and promises to do better. Neither of them expected what they were actually going to get. I arrived at the warehouse 15 minutes early, partly to scout the location and partly because I wanted to watch the others arrive. The building was exactly what I'd expected. A concrete shell that had been stripped of anything valuable, leaving behind empty windows and graffiti-covered walls that echoed every sound. June's car pulled up first, followed closely by Rhett's Camaro and Orion's sleek sedan. They got out together, huddled against the evening chill, and walked toward the warehouse entrance like they were approaching a crime scene. I waited until they were inside before I made my entrance. The warehouse was lit by a few battery-powered lanterns that someone had brought, casting long shadows across the empty floor. June, Rhett, and Orion stood in a loose triangle near the center of the space, and I could see that they'd been talking before I arrived. Kian, June said as I walked in, and her voice carried the kind of careful control that meant she'd been practicing this conversation. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, looking around at the dramatic setting. Very atmospheric, Rhett. Did you choose this place because you thought it would make me more likely to confess my sins? I chose it because it's private, he said, stepping forward with the kind of aggressive body language that was supposed to intimidate me. Because what we need to talk about doesn't need to be anyone else's business? Funny thing about privacy, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the voice recording app. It only works when everyone agrees to keep things private. What are you doing? June asked, and I could hear the first note of panic creeping into her voice. Making sure we have an accurate record of this conversation, in case anyone's memory gets fuzzy later. Turn that off, Rhett demanded. No. It was a simple word, but it carried the weight of every time I'd backed down, every argument I'd avoided, every confrontation I'd walked away from. June's eyes widened slightly, like she was seeing me for the first time. Okay, she said, taking a step toward me with her hands raised in what was supposed to be a calming gesture. Let's all just take a breath here. We came here to talk, not to fight. Did we? Because I was under the impression that you three came here to explain to me why I should be okay with my wife cheating on me. Was I misinformed? I wasn't cheating, June said, but her voice lacked conviction. No? What would you call it then? I was confused about what I wanted, about whether our marriage was working. And you thought the best way to figure that out was to start a relationship with your ex-boyfriend while you were still married to me. It wasn't a relationship. Stop lying. The words came out harder than I'd intended, echoing off the warehouse walls. Just for once in this entire mess, stop lying. To me, to yourself, to everyone. June's carefully constructed composure cracked, and for a moment I saw something that looked like genuine emotion. Fine, she said. Yes, I was attracted to Rhett. Yes, I was thinking about leaving you. Yes, I handled it badly. But that doesn't give you the right to destroy my entire life. Destroy your life? I haven't destroyed anything. I've just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices. You humiliated me in public. You've been sabotaging my friendships, my job. I've been telling people the truth. If that's destroying your life, maybe you should think about what that says about the life you've been living. Rhett stepped between us, puffing out his chest in a display that would have been more impressive if I hadn't spent the week systematically dismantling his carefully constructed image. Look, buddy, he said, I get that you're upset, but taking it out on June isn't going to solve anything. She's been through enough. Has she? Because from where I'm standing, she's been through exactly what she deserves. She made her choices, and now she gets to live with them. What do you want? Orion asked suddenly, speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. What would it take for you to stop this campaign of yours and let everyone move on? I looked at her carefully, trying to read her expression in the dim light. She was playing her part perfectly, pretending to be June's concerned friend, while knowing exactly what was going to happen on Monday morning. I want June to understand something, I said finally. I want her to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people like they're disposable and expect them to just accept it, that there's a cost to getting everything you want, and sometimes that cost is higher than you're prepared to pay. Okay, June said, and I could hear desperation creeping into her voice. I understand. I made mistakes. I hurt you. I'm sorry. What do you want me to do? How do I make this right? It was the question I'd been waiting for, and the answer was simpler than she probably expected. You don't, I said. You don't make it right. You live with what you've done, and you deal with the consequences, and you learn to be a better person. Or you don't, and you keep making the same mistakes until there's no one left who cares enough to be hurt by them. That's not fair, she whispered. No, I agreed. It's not, but neither is spending 8 years married to someone who sees you as a backup plan while they figure out if they can do better. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of rain beginning to fall on the metal roof. June was crying now, not the calculated tears she'd used to manipulate me in the past, but the ugly, desperate crying of someone who'd finally realized how much they'd lost. Rhett looked like he was trying to figure out whether to comfort her or make a run for it. Orion was watching everything with the detached interest of someone observing a fascinating experiment. So what happens now? June asked finally. Now you go home, wherever that is these days, and you start figuring out how to rebuild your life without using other people as building materials. And us? She asked, gesturing between herself and me. There is no us. There hasn't been for a while, apparently. I was just too stupid to realize it. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at the three of them standing in the dim light of the warehouse. Oh, and June, you might want to polish up your resume. I have a feeling you're going to need it soon. I walked out of the warehouse and left them there, probably trying to figure out what I meant by that last comment. They'd find out soon enough. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything look sharp-edged and unforgiving. I was in my office at City Hall, pretending to troubleshoot a printer that was probably older than some of our interns, when my phone buzzed with a text from Orion. It's done. June was terminated an hour ago. Security escorted her out. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite regret. June's professional life was over, at least in Riverside City. Word would spread quickly in the small network of consulting firms and marketing agencies that made up the local business community. She'd have to start over somewhere else, probably with a significant step down in salary and responsibility. My phone rang before I could respond to Orion's text. The caller ID showed June's number. You won, she said when I answered, her voice flat and exhausted. Is that what you wanted to hear? I wasn't trying to win anything, June. I was trying to make a point. Well, you made it. I lost my job. I lost my friends. I lost my home. I lost everything. You lost the things you were willing to risk to get what you wanted. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you systematically destroyed my entire life because I hurt your feelings. I leaned back in my chair and considered how to respond. The old Kian would have felt guilty, would have apologized, would have offered to help her figure out what came next, but the old Kian had been married to someone who'd respected him enough not to plan his replacement while he was in the next room. Your life isn't destroyed, June. It's just different than you expected it to be. You can get another job, make new friends, find a new place to live. People do it all the time. Not at 32, they don't. Not after being fired for cause. Not when their reputation is ruined. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to blow up our marriage for a guy who sells used cars. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I never meant for it to go this far, she said finally. What did you mean for, exactly? You were going to leave me for Rhett, right? You were going to start over with someone more exciting, more successful, more whatever it was that I wasn't giving you? I don't know. Maybe. I was confused. No, you weren't confused. You were selfish. You wanted to keep me as your safety net while you explored other options. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too, and when I wouldn't let you do that, you decided I was the problem. Maybe I was selfish, she admitted, but what you did was cruel. What I did was refuse to be a victim. There's a difference. Another long silence. What happens now? She asked. Now you figure out how to build a life that doesn't depend on using other people. Now you learn to live with the consequences of your choices. Now you grow up. And you? What do you do now? It was a good question. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been focused entirely on making sure June understood the cost of her betrayal. I'd been so consumed with the mechanics of revenge that I hadn't thought much about what came after. I figure out how to be happy, I said finally. Something I should have done a long time ago. I hung up and sat in my office, listening to the familiar sounds of municipal bureaucracy grinding on around me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Rhett. "We need to talk." I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. I texted back, "About what?" "About June, about what you did to her, about making this right." The audacity was stunning. Even after everything that had happened, Rhett still thought he was in a position to make demands. "Meet me at Riverside Park," I texted back. "The pavilion by the lake, 1 hour." "Fine, but this ends today." "Yes," I replied, "it does." I left work early and drove to the park, a sprawling green space that had been the crown jewel of Riverside City back when the city had money for crown jewels. Now it was showing its age, peeling paint on the pavilion, cracks in the sidewalks, a lake that was more algae than water, but it was still beautiful in its own way, and it was public enough that whatever Rhett had planned couldn't be too dramatic. He was waiting for me when I arrived, leaning against his Camaro like he was posing for a calendar. The car looked worse than I remembered. A few new scratches, a dent in the rear bumper, and what looked like the remnants of duct tape residue on the windshield. Apparently the past 2 weeks hadn't been kind to him either. "Kian," he said as I approached, and his voice carried the kind of barely controlled anger that meant he'd been working himself up for this confrontation. "Rhett, you wanted to talk? I want you to fix what you did to June." "And how exactly would I do that?" "Call her boss. Tell him you lied about the expense reports and the credit card stuff. Tell him you were trying to get back at her for leaving you." I had to admire his commitment to delusion. Even now, even after everything that had happened, he still believed that June was the victim in this situation. "I didn't lie about anything," I said calmly. Every piece of information June's boss received was accurate and verifiable. If it cost her job, that's because she actually did those things, not because I made them up. "You ruined her life over a mistake." "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped covering for her mistakes. There's a difference." Rhett stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me. It might have worked 2 weeks ago, but the man I'd been 2 weeks ago wouldn't have been standing in this park having this conversation. "She loved you," he said. "Maybe she made some bad choices, but she loved you, and you destroyed her for it. She loved the security I provided. She loved having someone to fall back on when her grand plans didn't work out. She loved knowing that no matter how badly she treated me, I'd always be there to pick up the pieces." "That's not love, Rhett. That's convenience." "You're wrong." "Am I? Then where are you now? June lost her job, her home, her reputation. She needs someone to help her rebuild. Where's the great love story? Where's the man who was worth destroying a marriage for?" Rhett's face flushed, and I could see that I'd hit a nerve. "That's different. The situation is complicated now." "No, it's not complicated. It's just expensive. June isn't the successful, independent woman you thought you were getting. She's someone who needs help, who comes with problems, who can't contribute to your lifestyle the way you expected. And suddenly she's not so attractive anymore, is she?" That's exactly what it is. You wanted June when she was married to someone else, when the relationship was exciting and forbidden and cost you nothing. Now that she's available and needy and comes with baggage, you've discovered that you're not actually interested in a real relationship with real responsibilities? Rhett opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. We both knew I was right. "So what happens now?" he asked finally. "Now you go back to selling used cars and trying to convince yourself that you're successful. June goes somewhere else and tries to rebuild her life. And I go home to a house that's finally quiet. That's it? That's how this ends?" "That's how this ends." I turned to walk back to my truck, then stopped and looked back at him. "Rhett, next time you decide you want someone else's wife, make sure you're prepared to deal with the husband. Some of us aren't as accommodating as we look." I drove home through the streets of Riverside City, past the closed factories and empty storefronts that marked a community in decline, past the neighborhoods where people like me lived quiet lives and tried to find happiness in small things. The city looked different to me now, not defeated, but resilient, not glamorous, but real. My house was exactly as I'd left it that morning, quiet, clean, and entirely mine. No expensive perfume in the air, no passive-aggressive notes about household chores, no tension crackling just beneath the surface of every conversation, just peace. I made dinner for one and ate it at the kitchen table while reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for months. Outside, the sun was setting over a city that had seen better days but was still standing, still home to people who got up every morning and did their jobs and tried to make the best of what they had. My phone sat silent on the counter. No calls from June, no texts from Rhett, No messages from Orion reporting on the latest developments in the drama that had consumed my life for the past 2 weeks. It was over. I'd won, if winning was the right word for it. June had learned that actions have consequences. Rhett had learned that wanting something and being willing to pay for it are two different things. And I had learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is refuse to be treated badly. Even when, especially when, that refusal costs you everything you thought you wanted. The house settled around me with the familiar creaks and sighs of a building that had weathered many storms. Tomorrow I would go back to work, back to fixing other people's problems and maintaining systems that kept the city running. But tonight, I sat in my quiet kitchen and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete satisfaction with my own life. Outside, Riverside City went about its evening business. People coming home from work, families gathering for dinner, neighbors walking dogs and checking mail and living the small, unremarkable lives that actually matter. And inside my house, I did the same, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to lose. The story was over. The revenge was complete. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was exactly where I wanted to be.